recording. Let me make a clap just so we can sync this up. So, I think that should do her. Anyways, welcome to the Lookout Podcast. With me today is my guest, Parker Duncan, and we fought some fire to this season, 2021. Man, I need more coffee. But thanks for joining me, Parker. I appreciate it, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's kind of a tough finding a spot to do this podcast this evening, but we made it work.
Heck yeah.
Hopefully the studio will be done. I can't say by the next one, but hopefully sometime this spring, and it'll make things a little easier. But let's talk a little bit about your background and kind of how we ended up getting together, like your history, and because I guess let's start with your fire background, and then we can kind of like thread everything else in there too. You know, like other stuff we want to cover. And
yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And maybe even if it's all right, touch on a few stuff before that even happened.
Yeah, definitely.
So I grew up in Whitefish, Montana, Flathead Valley, Northwest, and had a really good upbringing. Did a lot of skiing, skateboarding, lake fun. Really great place to grow up, right at the foothills of Glacier Park there. And my grandfather took me on a lot of hikes when I was a little kid. All sorts of adventures through the park. He had a group called Over the Hill Gang, which was I think the youngest guy on it was like 56, and the oldest guy was like 82, and it was all these old guys who would hike through the park, and they're all like war vets and old firefighters and just interesting folks,
That's
so
awesome. Through Glacier, huh?
Yeah, so I was with them a lot and would do stuff like that, and yeah, just had a really good upbringing there, and fell in love with skiing more than anything. My dad moved to the Flathead from Great Falls when he was younger because he loved skiing, and so he got us kids doing it. And
Nice.
I fell in love with skiing. That was probably my biggest passion. I wanted to be a freestyle skier. Growing up watching Tanner Hall and Pat Fuhas and all these guys, coming up on the scene, and got really into competing. I was never really a sports person. Like football, basketball was never really my thing. I was more into extreme sports, but I got on the freestyle skiing team on Big Mountain there. And
yeah, kind of a different kind of athletic,
Yeah, and we still pushed each other, and it was its own kind of team. And that was really great, except for I had 3 season-ending injuries in a row, 2005, 6, and 7.
Ooh.
I broke my leg in several places. The first, that one year, 2005, and then the next year was a broken collarbone, actually in a competition for skiing. It was a pretty pivotal one, too.
Oh, geez.
And then the year after that was I sliced my leg open on my freshly sharpened ski edge. It was about an inch from my artery in my leg. So luckily my Eagle Scout buddy who was there with me patched me up, and I was all good. But
jeez, dude, that's a close call.
Yeah, so after that third one, I was like, well, maybe freestyle skiing isn't my bag. And so it all worked out because, I found music, and music became my passion. Went to school for music after I graduated in 2009. Went to Pasadena, California, and studied bass guitar. And I've always been a fan of the arts, so took things there. But when I moved back to Montana and was kind of like eager for adventure, I almost joined the military and didn't for various reasons. But I found fire, and that's I started that. My first season was in 2013 out of Missoula here.
That's awesome. How old are you now?
I'm 31.
31.
So I was 22 at the time, about to turn 23. My first season.
Dude, you packed a lot of stuff in your 20s there, man. Like that's pretty good, man.
Yeah,
pretty good run there.
I really did. But just move. I've lived in I think 20 different places since I was 19.
Jeez, man,
Yeah.
That's awesome, man.
But it's nice to move around and do different things and experience different places and different people. And I moved to Missoula and in 2013 and wanted to do something different. And one of my buddies was talking about smoke jumping someday, and I was like, yeah, my grandpa did that, and wanted to get into it, wanted to do something adventurous that let me travel, and it's single and homeless, so might as well do something that's going to let me travel and stuff.
Yeah, the wildland lifestyle, man.
Yeah.
Single and homeless.
And I fell in love with it. I got on the Grayback crew out of Missoula here, and they sent me to Oregon, and I fell in love with the Oregon guys. We had a really really great season that year. So
that's awesome, man. And the contract world, even though it's pretty good size, there's not that as many of them because the Forest Service is so giant. You know, you feel like you're running into Forest Service folks all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, I think pretty much every big fire I've ran into some kind of contractor, you know, whether it be Grayback or one of the other, you know, various crews. But, I mean, you don't really get a chance to really hang out with them because they're kind of doing their own thing, almost similar to a hotshot crew where they're kind of got their chunk of line, got their camp, and they don't really interact as much with the feds. So, like, you're kind of the first person off contract crew that I ever spent, like, time with and got to hear about it, you know?
It was a good way to start the career because I had no idea what I was getting into. I didn't know the agencies. I didn't know how you moved up. I didn't know the different kinds of things you could do. You know, I didn't even know what a hotshot was when I started this job. I was like, I thought it was a joke that they called them that. I was like, oh, they think they're so cool calling themselves hotshots. Like, so it was kind of funny when I got into it. I had no idea about any of that. But my first role ever was in Oregon, and we were an IA resource for the local forest there because all the local resources got sucked into the American fire and the Rim fire at the time, and some huge incidents. So we just got an IA, like 8 to 9 IAs in like 2 weeks, and it was a really good introduction to get to see small fire and like get to work my way out from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially those IAs, man. Like, get to learn a lot and interact with dispatch a bunch, you know, where like those large fires, you're not going to talk to the dispatch, you know. Like, you're responding to your task force leader, typically if you're on a crew or an engine, you know, or maybe division.
Right, and I got to see, you know, the ecological aspects of it and learn. I had a really awesome squad boss at the time who lined me out on, you know, I think it was like my second day on the job. I was like, why are we doing this? Like, like isn't the forest like kind of supposed to burn? And, you know, he gave me the whole spiel and gave me some literature to read, and it was very enlightening and kind of helped me. And he had a complex and intellectual view of it, so it helped me kind of figure that stuff out because, like, obviously I was mostly there for the adventure and all that, but I wanted to like know why we were there and what we were trying to accomplish.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And that's what is kind of always like, not always surprising me, but always I guess like a pleasant surprise, I guess, is when you run into somebody like yourself, man. Like, you're a pretty educated fella, so it's nice to talk to you and kind of, and it's a different education than what I have typically, and that's what I run into in the Forest Service or in the wildland a lot, is like folks who maybe have a different background than what they want to go into and decide like, hey, I'd rather be outside and work in the woods and do this exciting job versus whatever else they might have, you know, turned to, you know.
Yeah, and that was the biggest thing is I wanted something that was, you know, would put me out into the world and let me see some more places and experience things with people, and I was eager for the camaraderie. I wanted that, and we were a really close squad on that crew, and that was a good introduction for me for sure. Yeah,
that's what I was going to say, like the team atmosphere and fire, and it's probably been just like a theme that keeps looping in this podcast, and it probably always will because that's what of fire course. Is, yeah. And then with contract crews, is it similar to the Forest Service where it's just a really good job that you can do while going to school? Because the Forest Service and probably BLM and maybe some other groups in the wildland understand like, hey, I'm in school, I can only work a short season, and they totally understand. So the 1039 really works out pretty good. That seasonal employment.
I mean, I feel like it's good in that respect. I can't speak for others because I wasn't going to like full-time school or anything at that time, but I feel like they would work with folks pretty well. And you know, one thing about the contract world is that you know, if you get on the right company or the right crew, they do work with you and they do help you out. And especially once you become like a perm, you're part of a family that they will they treat pretty well.
That's good, man.
And they'll work around your family, your schedule, things like that to accommodate you. And so yeah, there's pros and cons to every agency, of course, and every contractor, I'm sure. But
yeah, absolutely.
I liked that aspect for sure. And you know, and one thing I've noticed about contractors that I've seen on the line and stuff is their morale is usually pretty high, and they're usually just really stoked to be there. And they're trying to compete with, you know, the feds and all these other things, so they'll put in good work. I mean there's contract crews out there that will blow some shot crews out of the water, because there's some shot crews that are like, you know, not that great, honestly.
Sometimes just going through the motion and kind of wearing the name maybe a little bit, you know, and that happens in all, like you said, all aspects of life and all aspects of fire, you
Absolutely.
know? Like, that's always complaining. I think anything that's high level, I've even heard like Jocko talk about it. I think it was Jocko or somebody talk about the Navy SEALs. It's like could have even Goggins or one of those guys who are still getting after it. Talk about how like once they get through buds or whatever, which is insane, that they just shut off because like, oh, I made it.
No, there's always a new threshold. There's always something to work on for sure.
Yeah,
and we'll probably touch on more of that later too.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And then the contract world, like you said, like the hard work, man, and that little competition, I guess is what I want to touch on, is that I think that's what people don't really understand either, is like they see boots and greens and yellows, and hard hats, and people like think it's all one group, and in a sense we are one like big family, but it's like there's so many different layers to that big fire that people have no idea about, even from like the camp crews to, like you said, the hot shot smoke jumpers, whoever, type 2 IA engines, like different agencies.
And it's humbling because before I ever went on my first fire, I dug probably 5 to 6 miles of line on project work with the contract crew, and so by the time I was on my first fire, I knew how to dig line, but it was there was all these other things to learn, and so a lot of times, especially with these busier seasons that we're having, hot shots getting thrown on surge crews, burning more, doing what they're utilized for, which makes sense.
Totally.
It's easy to get kind of, used to this status. And one thing I liked about the contractors is like they're mopping up behind you. They're doing the dirty work. They're doing the kind of stuff that hot shots used to do more of, but now are having to be utilized for their special skill sets. And I think it's, once in a while the hot shots will be like mopping up and they'll be crying about it or whatever. It's like, but it's like, the type 2 crews do that a lot and all the time, and they're doing it and they're doing it with a smile on their face. So, and doesn't mean that they can't burn and have those capabilities either, but generally the qualifications to meet those standards are given to those higher type 1 crews. Yeah. But I think it is good to remain humble and know that, like, if you want 1,000 or 1,200 hour season, you're gonna have to mop up a bunch.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It's
part of it.
Yeah, totally, and not as rare as it used to be when I first started. You got 1,000 hours, man. Like, you were on an elite hotshot crew that was getting called out a lot. That doesn't seem to happen as much anymore. And I guess back to your history too. I don't think, did you mention when I was messing with the recorder? But your fire history started with contracting, and then did you go contracting to hotshots? Yeah,
so I did 2 years on a type 2 hand crew, and then I applied for like all the crews. Like I applied, I threw the net wide for hot shots. I didn't really care who. I just really wanted to get picked up by one. That was my goal. And so I was actually gunning for Gila hot shots because I had a buddy on them and just had heard a lot of interesting things about them. And like any of those R3 crews, honestly, if your goal is to hot shot, like, you will get some of the best experience and some of the most hours with some of the most dialed people in that region. And not to put any other region down, that was told to me, and from what I've seen, they produced that. And so I wanted to be in Region 3, and I ended up getting on Mount Taylor Hot Shots in 2015. I had never heard of Mount Taylor, but I was like, hey, they're an R3. Yeah. They're an R3 crew out of New Mexico. Like, let's send it. And so I took the job. Yeah, nice, man. Yeah, that's the Gila, man. I could follow a little fire on that. That's a gorgeous area. And we were actually kind of in, I can't remember what fire it was, but we were in coordination with saving the Gila trout on one of those big fires. Really? I can't remember what it was, but like the Gila trout. Huh? Yeah, really rare. What river runs through there? I don't even remember. It was one of my first seasons in fire, and I remember like they were talking about just the rare species of the Gila trout, and the fire. They were trying to get ahead of the fire to save a bunch of these trout, and I think they did it. And this is a good time to maybe tie into the biologist perspective, because when I was on Mount Taylor, we had a 900-hour season, but the first 2 months was sitting at home. Ooh. They have a long season, so it was just a lot of rain and stuff. And I ended up having a really good conversation with a biologist when we were out on project work, and I was looking at the unit we were all cutting in, and we had discussed the prescription, in detail. But the biologist took me aside, and I asked her a few questions, and she was like, think of it this way, like, we're the scientists, you're the artists, you're a hunter, right? And I was like, yeah. And she's like, well, if you were bow hunting through this area, how would you want it to look? You'd have some, little patches of trees for animals to hide, keep a couple snags, for the owls to have habitat in, like, have it look like, that you can see and actually hunt, and like you're not like, so there's not a juniper every 4 feet, but also we're not trying to clear cut, like, how does this forest, like, how would you want it to look if you were hunting in it? I was like, oh, that's a different perspective of something I hadn't seen before. And they're much more, scrutinizing about how, the prescription develops. But her just conveying that to me helped me see it a little better. Because some people, I'm not like trying to call anybody out, but some people, they just cut everything in front of them.
Totally.
And that's easy to do, but it's best to like take a minute, like look back, like, hey, should I leave this? Should I take this? And kind of like have a plan, for the next 50 feet.
Absolutely.
Or whatever it is. So,
and especially when you're sawyer, like even probably me, I'd probably the same way. So you're just like, someone's watching me, and I gotta put out, because like I appreciate being here.
You're trying to prove yourself.
Yeah, trying to prove it. Yeah.
But there's a balance between that and like what the actual goal is for that. So
yeah, and I was so ignorant, man. I didn't even really like. I wasn't really looking around at that. I was just like, all right, this is the DBH I gotta stay within, and whatever leaf trees and like habitat trees like you were mentioning too, and so you went to the Hot Shots in Mount Taylor, and where in the state is that at?
So Mount Taylor is based out of Grants, New Mexico, about an hour and a half, I believe, west of Albuquerque. And so we're kind of just we were just in this tiny little town where the main economy is a uranium mine, and you're just stuck between a hoop of reservations. I think I worked with mostly Native Americans / Native American Mexicans on that crew who were from 7 to 8 different tribes.
Oh, really?
So I got a lot of cool cultural, perspective from them and their different tribes and their different ways of looking at things. So that was really cool. It was mostly, it was the first time I was, growing up in, whitefish. It was very, very much a white community, and being like being the minority and being on that other side of things was enlightening and actually really cool experience.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. It's similar being Whitehall. Like, there's not really a reservation too close, and we'd play some.
It's ironic both places were the white in the name.
Yeah, exactly. That's probably one of the darker kids in school at one point, I think, being part native. But everyone's really cool. We played a lot of the native teams, but that was about the only interaction you had with them, so didn't really get a good perspective until I went to college and talked to more folks that were actually off the reservation,
Yeah, and that crew actually, from the crew's symbol to the way they run things are very respectful of the local tribes and the various cultural nuances, and like even on a small fire, we'd often call an agricultural specialist to make sure we're not like messing around in somebody's sacred grounds. So that would happen a lot down there. Actually, we'd have a specialist. I can't remember exactly what they're called for the Forest Service, but they're
we get like an archaeologist. Usually come in and check that out. Like I talked to this ARC on this one fire, and it started from that time. But should move down the list, man. Otherwise, I'll
no worries. But yeah, that was a good first season with the Hot Shots. Kind of ended crazy. I actually ended that season hospitalized. There was speaking of
Jeez, you've been beat up, man. What happened?
Well, it's funny because we're talking about this post COVID right now, but camp crud's always been a thing, and so by late September, it was a busy season, but it wasn't busy enough to be like everything's indirect. Like it was like, it's almost like those in-between seasons are harder on your body because you're going direct so much and you're not doing as much burns, you're not doing as much prep and all that. So we were just, going hard, balls to the wall, and the crew was pretty worn down by the end there. And there was this gnarly virus going through camp. And it was a respiratory virus. The same day I got pulled off the hill.
What year was that?
It was 2015 on the Rough Fire, in California. At the time, it was the 5th largest fire in California state history. Now it's not even in the top 20.
Jeez, I remember.
Puts you in perspective of where things are at right now. So
6 years.
I got pulled off the hill. Nothing too crazy. I mean, I was malnourished. I was dehydrated. I think I had 4 IVs in 12 hours.
Holy cow, that's really dehydrated, dude.
Yeah, they needed to really put a lot of fluid in me. But as I was I wasn't like an emergency. They didn't have me on the ambulance or anything. I was going down in the EMT truck. But while I was going downhill in the EMT truck, 2 Arrowhead hotshots were getting medevaced off the hill via helicopter because of respiratory. Geez. And I guarantee it had to do with that virus too, because, and you know, kudos to those guys because they were conducting a burn on the very same piece of ground that one of their homies had passed away from cutting a snag years before. So there's a lot going on there, you know, and just to be on that piece of ground, and you know, I you know, put all my condolences and my heart out to those guys for doing what they did. And you know, we were doing a big like 5-mile catcher's mitt kind of burn operation, and the funny part is, after even that part happened, as crazy as it was, then the IC gets over the horn and he's like, clear channel. We got 2 Cal Fire firefighters in the middle of this burn. I don't know their engine number. Get them out of there. Like, so all this stuff's happening at once, and I'm crawling around ICP with an IV, like like walking around with a dirty white shirt. Like, this guy's got like a needle in his arm getting an IV, you know. And so anyways, that season ended a little gnarlier than I had planned, and we got demoed because I wasn't the only one messed up. This guy was allergic to cedar tree, and
oh really?
his face was all swollen.
Cedar everywhere up in that country, right?
Yeah. So we got out of there, and it was a good first year on the hot shots because it taught me my limitations. It taught me that they're much further than I previously thought. We did some crazy shifts. We did some really cool operations, and you know, it was an intro into that world. And so to move forward, I got picked up by Bitterroot the following season, and I was with them for 3 seasons. And you know, the cool part about Bitterroot was we were it was mostly the same people for those 3 years. After that, you know, when I left, about almost half the crew left, and for various reasons. But it was it was cool to be, you know, by 2018, you know, we go conduct a burn at night, and everybody knows what they need to do. We're dialed. We just fall into where we need to be, and so that was really cool. That's where a lot of my experience came from and stuff was with those guys.
Absolutely, man. I was going to tie that back into like the burning opportunities. You know, like a Type 2IA crew, like you said, typically can burn and will burn on some occasions, but you know, usually it's the hot shots. But because of that cohesiveness, you have the chemistry. It's like, all right, we're going to burn this. You don't even really have to say much, you know. It's like everyone already knows kind of their job and what to do, and versus like
saws are holding, you know who's burning, you know who's firing boss, you know, just everybody falls in.
Yeah, versus like the Type 2IA crew, especially if it's like one of your first couple shifts, and if it's a throw together forest crew, you might not even know who can do what even. You know, like, oh, okay, who has actually burned before, you know, and that makes it the operation slow way down, you know.
Yeah, and it depends on what elements line up and what don't. You know, you might have a chunk of hill that's like not the most forgiving, maybe for the lighters and or maybe for the holders or vice versa. So it's just like and so sometimes that stuff will work out, and sometimes it's like you gotta adjust a bit as you go, and that adjustment will be easier, obviously, if you have worked together before. So.
Yeah, absolutely, especially in a tighter window of time. We're like the Type 2IA crew. It's a great learning experience. You know, you can learn a lot from it and get some good coaching, and even maybe from a more experienced crew that you might be with on that division, or your crew boss who might be ex-hotshot or whatever might happen, or just have a ton of experience on a district. So, I mean, there's definitely a good teachable moment there, but if you're in a time pinch, it makes more sense to grab a hotshot crew or someone Type 1 related, you know?
Yep, absolutely.
And then... but yeah, and also pushing the limits, like you said, with the hotshot world too, like the long shifts, being a little more remote too with the hotshots. It's not like with an engine where you're kind of carrying all your supplies with you sometimes, you know, and most of the time, you know, with the hotshot crew, you got whatever you brought with you on the hill, and you know, you definitely know if you got some holes in your game there. You know, like I started carrying way more electrolytes, and when I was on just the Great Northern Type 2IA crew, I never was on the hotshot crew, but just even that, you know, getting a little like hotshot light, I guess, you know, because we were kind of like a training crew, you know.
Yeah, those electrolyte tablets have saved me big time.
That's when
especially in the desert and stuff. You know, you're just pouring out sweat. So, you know, I would usually have like a quart that's just dedicated to that electrolyte tablet. And
Same.
Yeah, I'd have a couple of those a day.
Yeah,
for sure.
Same, man. It really makes a difference. You can, and experts and everybody knows that. My background's health, human performance, but you're losing electrolytes along with fluid, just water alone. So if you don't replenish those electrolytes, you can start locking up and still have clear urine, but you're still locking up a little bit. Had that happen on the saw one time. And then then hot shotting, and then smoke jumping, and then district.
So I applied for Missoula Smoke Jumpers. I got the job. I trained my butt off, and this was just this last spring, and unfortunately washed out day one in first phase, in the physical phase. I was doing the line dig, and my body cramped up. I couldn't keep my electrolytes or food down because I had hurled it up during the first 2 workouts before you get to do the, I don't want to give too much away, but it's not too secretive anymore.
No,
like, you're in for it when you go do it, as you know. So, and it was a very eye-opening experience because I wasn't a slouch. Like there's things I definitely would have trained differently if I were to try again for something like that. I was running 7.5 minute miles, up to 7-8 miles. I could run. I was doing pretty good calisthenics.
Yeah, that's a good time.
But and there I could have even improved on that a little bit, or done some gnarlier runs. But like I would have trained differently, and also in the phase, the days right before day one, I would have probably just carb loaded and eaten a lot more, but that's not really in my character. I'm kind of a light eater. I'm generally a little bit lighter for my height. I'm 6'1", but I'm only 150 to 160 pounds, and I don't like to feel too full, and I eat what I need to, and that's about it. But when you're training like that, you got to really pack on the calories and the protein and all that. And so I probably would have done more of that before, but it was a good experience. I'm glad I even got the opportunity. The way they run that program there is very professional. It's very tight. They put a lot of time into the smoke jumper training regimen, and I do respect them for that.
Yeah, and I was just gonna say, not to cut you off, but if you went on to something else, my brain would have went somewhere else. But talking about that, the caloric intake, getting those calories up. Luckily, I don't know how I thought about it. One of my best buddies, he was working in McCall at the same time, and we were just talking about having a squirrel stash because kind of same deal, man. I'm more of a grazer, not a big meal guy.
Yeah.
So
I had pocket snacks for sure.
Yeah.
But it was just it just wasn't enough, and between the cramping up, and there was a mental aspect too. I dipped out for a second when I was they took me off the dig. They're like, "You're worthless right now. Just go swamp." Yeah. And I went and swamped and was with the saw for a minute, and I took a second to go into the woods, and I just was looking at the sky, and I was like, you know what, I wanted this, but you gotta really want it. You gotta want it more than your next breath. And I've felt that way about certain things in my life, and so I used that as a comparison. When I wanted to play bass in music school, and I wanted to play bass for these bands and stuff, I was practicing 11 to 12 hours a day sometimes. I was putting my heart and soul in it. I've never worked harder than I did in music school. And so I thought of that, and I knew what that felt like, and I'm like, because who doesn't want to be a jumper? But you gotta really, really want it, and you want to get through that. And so I had a moment there when I was sitting there, and I was like, you know what? I don't even know if I want to jump. I don't even know if I want to be in fire anymore. But you know what? Let's see. Let's see how this pans out. And then that's when my body cramped up. And so it goes back to what they say is your mind is going to quit way before your body is. My body probably could have kept going a little bit longer. That limit is so much further, and I've pushed that limit before with the hot shots. But it was one of those things where I realized that I washed. I get off the hill. It was 10 at night or something. I went and got Taco John's in Missoula, and I went home just so sore. And I woke up, and I was so sore when I woke up. I felt like I could barely get out of bed, and I looked at the clock, and I'm like, they're still digging, they're still digging, man. Yeah. And I'm just that takes a certain kind of human. And the person that washed after me apparently was hospitalized. So it's not. Yeah, and you've been through it. Like it's no joke, and it's probably the hardest thing somebody could do outside of certain selection processes of the military. It really is. And so you got to be mentally and physically prepared for something like that.
I think so too, because I was definitely toeing the line and talking to a guy who actually like was. We were almost like stepping in the same shoes, and he ended up pushing it more than I did, and he ended up getting heat exhaustion and probably getting close to heat stroke. I mean, he's like one of the nicest guys on the planet, and hopefully I'll have him on the podcast someday. Yeah. And he was like starting to try to fight the trainers and stuff, man. Just having and his experience was at NCSB before I came through, like 3 years. So I think his experience, unfortunately, is the reason why I was able to make it through that first day, because I was going down the same rabbit hole that he was of just like dehydrated, cramping, and starting to get down the heat exhaustion rabbit hole. And it was, like he had the same kind of deal. It was like, usually it's in spring, it's cooler temperatures, but it was like unseasonably hot when I went through. I think it was the same thing with him too. So
this was down in California?
No, in Washington.
Oh, in Washington. Wow. That's interesting to think about hot temperatures there that time of year.
Yeah, it was in the 90s, and and it was on me too. Like I just wasn't hydrating like I should have, and I got behind the curve, and like how that goes. Once you get behind the hydration curve,
it's so hard to get back, man.
Yeah, they had this stuff called Ceralite, which is like Pedialyte, but way worse tasting, and I forced that down and Pedialyte and water and was mixing it all, and I didn't sleep that night. I didn't sleep the next night barely because I was up peeing so much, but I was just trying to rehydrate, and barely made it is the moral of that story. Barely made it, but
hey, you make it though.
Yeah, I guess
But it was a really humbling experience. I was glad to be able to. It put some things into perspective of me and what I valued, and
that's what I was gonna loop it back around to.
Yeah, and I got I was kind of in between jobs. Like Flathead was down to pick me up. They needed people, Flathead Hotshots, and but I had jumped on with the guys who were burning out of the jump base there just to have some work in the meantime while I was figuring out. And that's when I met you and was down there burning with the Steve I folks, and I just really liked the vibe of everyone, and there was just I base a lot of where I work at. I try to based off the attitude of people and the positivity. That's why I got on Flathead Hotshots, because everybody was like, Lynn is the best boss ever. Lynn Emmerich, shout out to her. She's one of the best bosses I've ever had. Just an amazing, incredibly professional person who has done so much for the aviation community.
Absolutely.
In fire, and so I'd heard a lot about her and the program she ran, and I was not disappointed. It exceeded my expectations, and I would have probably stayed on there an extra year, but she retired, and I knew things would get switched up. Not that it's bad. I'm sure it's a great program still, but I knew it would get switched up. But anyways, I like to base where I work off the vibe and the overall energy of the place, and I got that from Steve I, and it looked like they had kind of rebuilt the program there. So, yeah, when I moved over there, I wasn't disappointed, and it was a really cool experience this summer because we had so many, as first year, second year firefighters, and all these, a lot of new people, and it was, instead of being a part of this like elite firefighter and being like a rookie again on the bottom of the totem pole, it was like, well, now I could use a little bit of my experience and my leadership skills to line out these rookies, and because Overhead's got their stuff going on, and you and me kind of talked about it one day where we're kind of those guys with the experience but not the quals or the status to really like be Overhead, but we're like we can be like those guys to like, hey, this is how you do this is how you do this, without the engine captain or the AFMO or whoever telling them what to do. So it was actually really rewarding. It was not what I was expecting this summer to be like, but I was very humbled and glad to be there, and it was the right situation actually, and it kind of brings me back to that. I wanted to talk a little bit about my roommate told me this story the other day because I was in the dumps, and he's like, what is good? And I'm like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, you think something bad happens to you and it might be something good. So he told me this little story about this guy who got his horse ran away, his prized horse. He had a couple horses, but his prized horse got away and he never found it. And his neighbor, and he felt in the dumps about it, and then his neighbor gave him 3 horses for it. For what happened to him. So you never know what is good. And then a couple weeks later, to the same man, his son broke his leg, and his son was like, my whole summer's ruined, this and that. And then there's a war draft, and he didn't get drafted because of his broken leg. So you never know what's good or what's bad, and things will always work out in your favor.
Absolutely.
And part of the biggest thing about this was I obviously felt really terrible when I washed out of jumper training, especially as early on as I did, especially as how confident I felt. But I didn't allow myself to be a bummer about it.
And dwell on it.
Yeah, I just was like, find a new mission.
Yeah, exactly.
What's the new mission? Find a job, find the next crew I'm going to be on. And, on the Hot Shots, we always used to talk shit on the district folks. We'd call them district fucks. But you know what? Yeah, but you know what? It was cool to be on another a different type of resource in a different context.
Yeah.
Learn that perspective. I have more respect for that now. Just like I had more respect for Helitack after being on them. I'm like, I'm sitting on the hill and I didn't get my lunch till 4 o'clock because the helicopter took that long to fly it up here. And it's like, but then you realize the logistics of aviation. You're like, okay, you got to realize this is what they're doing. You can't just fly a helicopter around like you can drive a truck up. It's not the same thing.
Yeah. Absolutely,
so anyways, I had a lot more respect for that, and it was a really good experience this summer, and I got some awesome opportunities. As you know, you were dispatched during a couple of my IAs.
Yeah,
so I got
that's great, man.
Couple IAs. I went down to Red Lodge and got to do a little fill assignment on a Helitack crew there, and I met a girl actually in town while I was there, and we're still dating.
That's awesome.
So
man.
that's kind of like I said, you never know what's good or what's bad. It all worked out. I probably never would have met her if it wasn't for this that type of assignment.
Absolutely,
and
dude.
stuff, so.
And if you just focus on the bad, man, it would just keep spiraling down. But instead, you just look forward, and like you said, new mission, new goal. And just keep moving forward, no matter what it is. And
that's what you have to do.
Yeah, and there's better leaders and better quotes than I can come up with off my top of my head right now. But yeah, just moving forward, I think that's how you get stuff done.
And this is a good time to mention, I am no kind of badass or anything. My first year on Bitterroot, I was a troublemaker. You talk to a few people on the Bitterroot, they'll tell you I had my moments, and I wanted to be on a saw super bad, and I was on a saw on Mount Taylor, and Mount Taylor wasn't tank for tank. I had to earn my place as third saw by the end of the season. I was swamping all year.
Oh, geez.
And so it's a good learning experience, and that was humbling too. But I got to Bitterroot, and I felt like, I deserve to be on a saw.
Yeah,
now that I'm a saw.
Guy,
but to Bitterroot, they're like, you're just another rookie, and
absolutely.
which is so they knew I wanted to be a saw. I became a little bit of a troublemaker. I had my moments, and then but. Once again, what is good, I wanted to be on a saw, but because I wasn't on a saw, and because, I had the endurance, they would always put me on a torch. In 2017, all we did was burn. It was so busy in Montana that year. All we did was burn it, and I was on a torch every night or every day, and I was just burning. So, and that's super fun, but it takes a certain person, to be able to carry that torch for hours and hours and hours, and crossing hillsides and walking through spider webs and stuff. So it was a blessing in that sense, because I really got to see fire behavior from that perspective, and put me in a different role. I feel like every crew's got that guy that's like, oh man, he's a troublemaker. The assistant soup hates him, but all he does is burn. It's like because he's a masochist and he can just walk all night, and never complain.
I was gonna say,
suck smoke or whatever.
Got a workhorse, might be a little trouble.
Yeah. But I came back in 2017. Was kind of my redemption year, and then 2018 I got my FFT1, and that felt cool. And some people are like, wow, it took you 6 seasons to get your FFT1, but I think that's a very underrated qual. I think some people get it after 2-3 seasons. I don't necessarily agree with that.
Yeah.
I think you should be able to not just be able to run a squad, but run a crew. I mean, that's what crew boss is for, obviously. But, how we ran it was, there were some days where if you're an FF21 trainee, you run the whole crew, or you run a firing operation, and then you get done with the firing up, and then you switch roles to something else. Maybe you talk to the homeowners of a house you're about to burn off of, and I got to do all those things. So it was a rewarding experience. I was glad they gave that to me, and I was able to earn my place back on the crew with that.
Dude, that's a great experience. Well, and that's like I was picking your brain when you were still like with the jumpers, but kind of in limbo of where you're going to end up, and you weren't, like you said, I think you were saying at that point, you weren't sure if you're going to stay in fire and kind of looking for maybe something else. And
yeah.
So like when we got to talking on the hillside, and I think I was just fuel muling it that day, so I got a chance to hold time with you a bunch.
You were hiking some fivers around. For sure.
Yeah, oh, God, man. Trying to prove myself still, and I'm 35.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. There's always a new threshold, and there's always something else. That's why I have this, I have a bald-faced hornet tattooed on my wrist, because one time I was on a fire, and we were getting stung up by yellow jackets right and left, like it's Idaho. I don't know why the bees love Idaho, but they're everywhere in Idaho. And I was cutting down a snag. This was on Mount Taylor, and the snag had a hive in it, and it was stinging my neck and face and ear. I remember I felt one of them on my earlobe stinging me, but I'm not gonna. I was going in my back cut. I'm not gonna quit. Like,
yeah.
I got to get this, and it was a candlestick, so I got to make sure to get this thing on the ground.
Yeah, you're committed and not much time to work with
exactly.
at that point.
It totally committed. So I got it on the ground, and Sawboss saw what happened. He's like, "You guys take lunch, like have your 10-minute." Supposed to be half-hour lunch.
Yeah, exactly.
We sat down and had our ham sandwich and Lay's, and this yellow jacket latched onto my ham on the ham sandwich right when I was taking a bite and stung me in the gum, right where the gum meets the tooth, actually.
Yeah.
Just so my head's just like, and I'm all angry and all head full of poison, and I see this yellow jacket fly through the air, and this bald-faced hornet comes out of nowhere and latches onto it, rips its head off, and starts eating out of its body as it flies away. And it was symbolic. Instantly in that moment, I realized the lesson, and it was like, there's always something bigger and better than you out there, and you need to not compare yourself to that, but compare yourself to your former self.
Yeah.
How do I become the bald-faced hornet and then grow beyond this yellow jacket? So it's symbolic for me,
Yeah, and try to be better every day. And it sounds like you got a spirit animal in that experience too.
Yeah, it is kind of my spirit animal. And like most firefighters, like, why do you have a bald-faced hornet? That is the worst thing ever. They hate them, and I'm like, I've never been stung. One time I saved a queen bald-faced hornet too. I thought it was a hummingbird.
Oh really? It's that
it
big,
was,
huh?
Oh, man, it was so.
Dude.
I went to
Just
get
a
my
monster.
camera. It was when I lived in Whitefish on the beach. At one point, I had this like little Japanese garden outside my house, and I came outside, and I thought it was a hummingbird, and it was this like 3.5-inch bald-faced hornet.
Jeez,
like,
dude.
and she was in trouble. It was just like all tangled up on this thing, and I like let her go, and I was like, holy cow, I'm never gonna mess with that thing again. So yeah, it's kind of my little spirit animal experience. But yeah,
sounds like word got around with the bald faces, man.
Yeah, but the symbolism with that is, there's something bigger out there, bigger and better, and you gotta be humble about that. And so
yeah, that's a great approach, man. A great way to live life too. And that's like just talking on the line, and you're all this experience. What, 3 different hot shot crews? Is that what you got?
2. I was on Mount Taylor and then Bitterroot. Yeah.
And then Bitterroot. Oh, gotcha. And then Flathead was Helitack.
Yeah. I actually took a year off too. It's worth mentioning. I took 2019 off, which was funny because the only things burning in 2019 apparently were Alaska and the Amazon. A lot of people didn't get a ton of hours that year. Some people did. I talked to the shots, and they said they actually did a pretty good season. They moved around enough and were on the rotation right. But, it was a good year to take off. I needed it. I needed it for my mental health after 3 years on the shots. I had some my own demons I needed to work on. Because 2018 was kind of crazy. There was just some things that happened that were just kind of like, kind of a little bit of a mind, mind fuck. So I had to grow beyond that, and I think taking a year off was smart. I wanted to publish my book, which I ended up getting my first book published.
We still got to talk about that.
Yeah, we'll get into the trilogy here in a little bit, but I got the first book of my trilogy published, and
congratulations.
Thanks.
That's huge, man.
And worked at a local restaurant with one of my best friends. And he was the kitchen manager, so we slang burgers all summer and went fishing, and I finally got to kind of went to a music festival. Hadn't done that in a while, so got to do some summer things, and
that's awesome.
So it was good to take a year off, and I recommend anybody who's done fire for 5-6 years and is maybe feeling a little bit burnt out, like, take a year off. Like, if any employer's like, oh, we looked down on you because you took a year off, like, there's going to be other things that come up too. Like, they should respect that. I think it's good to do that,
Yeah. Cindy Champion actually recommended that my second year smoke jumping in West. She was a smoke jumper out of West. I think still might be. And just awesome gal. And she was talking to me. She said when she first got her perm, and back then it was still pretty hard to get a perm. There wasn't that many of them. She said she took either that fire season off or detail or something. So just stepped away from fire for 1 year. She said like you said, man, way better, clearer head, had more motivation to come back and fight fire and like appreciate the job again. Had to look down to make sure I wasn't redlining on this. And I mean, I had always thought about that, and then actually, weirdly enough, I took 2019 off, not really by choice, but by health reasons. Because my Crohn's was acting up really bad. Right. And then, so it definitely did help, because I was like, you know what? And I was pursuing physical therapy, and which I still think is a great profession. It's just, I still was like, the outdoors was calling. That's why I got there in the first place, was like to be outside. And,
But you wanted to do it on your own terms without that radio in your ear and ships overhead and all that stuff. It's a little different. So.
Totally, man. And it kind of brought me back. But and then like just to wrap up the Steve I and the fire part of your career, just the summer that I got to, and I think this happens not only to you but to a lot of people when they're in rookie training, is there's some quiet time, and I think that's designed because then you get to be in your own head without the cadre being on you, any of the trainers or any of your fellow rookies, and then you get a chance to like really do some inner soul searching. You're like, and I don't think it's a tough thing when a few of these folks like yourself and one of my other really good buddies, Tyler, Wash, it's like more of a thing like, is this really what I want to do with my life? You get a chance to like kind of do a little more introspection on where your career is going and stuff, and like
because as you know, a lot of those times you get a second chance at like, hey, if you want to come back next year. A couple of the jumpers were like, hey man, it's those first couple weeks are really taxing, like come back and try again. And it made me think a lot. And I think if I did go for something like that, I'd probably go rappel at this point. I really like working with helicopters. I'm going for Helitack right now, a different Helitack crew, and so I'm it's one of those things that, like you said, it'll kind of put that in perspective and see what you want to do. But that elite status is, and being a part of it's an IA resource, right? Like there's a point to it. Like, yes, there's history and there's clout and there's all this stuff, but the point of these resources is like, like with jumpers, it's it's speed, it's depth, it's the ability to get to a hard spot to get to quickly and get competent people on the ground. And I like that aspect. I like doing IA type stuff. Obviously hot shots is more like big fire, and you're more doing like these burn operations. So, and not to say that they don't do IA too, but all these resources, they exist for a reason, and so finding out kind of like what your niche is and where you fit into is part of that.
That's what I think.
And not letting your ego decide that, but like letting your subconscious decide that rather.
Totally, yeah. And like you said, the ego part, and at least from my lens, is when you're going through rookie training, you get that chance to like, your ego is pretty well squashed at this point, because you're so beat up, and you're like that
happens pretty quick.
Yeah, it happens really quick, yeah. So you get a chance to like push that aside, not really by you, but by somebody else, and then you get a chance to really think like, is this where I want to be? Like you were saying, man. And that's when I tied into you in Steve I when we were doing that burn and got to talking to you, and we were talking like that middle management role that Steve I has, and I think a lot of districts do, and it's like your title isn't anything important. You're still seasonal, but like with the experience, you kind of get pushed into a role where it's like, hey man, the foreman's tied up or everybody's tied up. Like, can you take these guys out in the field and show them something? And you got enough experience, like being on the hot shot crew, 2 hot shot crews, Helitack, contract, like, so you can take a crew out and get some meaningful work done, versus like if the engine foreman's doing whatever or engine captain, sorry, these days I keep forgetting it's captain now. Is tied up doing whatever in the office. It's like no big deal. You can lead PT, you can lead the project work, and then you get the folks in the field and out of the field safely, and people can trust you. And I was like, I knew we needed that, and that's why, not to.
Yeah, it's valuable to have those different levels, right?
Absolutely.
Like if like I actually was, it was great to have you as dispatch last year, But I was kind of bummed because I was like, oh man, I wish Luke was around more to like be my like right hand man with a lot of this stuff, because it'd be perfect, you know, one per mod or whatever. So
yeah, because that's kind of how we started out, and then
but it still worked out great. People were awesome for the most part. There was really good attitudes, and people wanted to learn, and it's really helps when people are receptive like that and like wanting to do stuff.
Yeah, so we had a really good crew this year, like filled with that.
Yeah, it really was.
Yeah, so just want to tie that all together and kind of how we met, and then we, I mean, dude, like with your books, I was just gonna say like your artistry background, like just being an artist, like music, art, author, and just kind of the adventurer you are. It was like right away I was already vibing with you, and I was like, man, like, you know, that's when I started picking your brain about other stuff and talking about this podcast that was still barely getting off the ground.
We talked about a lot of the points that you wanted to talk
and I was like, I need this guy around. So like that's when I was really trying to sell the program of Steve idea. But I was saying that to lead into this, your books. So when did you write your first book?
So I wrote a book in 2011 called Mark of the Beast, and it was terrible. But I was working at my local ski resort. I had gotten sick, and so they put me in like on the chairlift. I was a lift operator. They put me in the chairlift that was like the rich local homeowners, and you literally like take them up the lift and shut the lift off until the next person. You'd get like 10 to 15 people a day. Yeah. So you're like alone in this little thing. And so I'd bring my computer, I'd watch Westerns, and when I got done watching all my Westerns, I don't know, that's just like a pastime thing I do in the winter. I don't know what it is. But I watched all my Westerns, and I've always been a writer, like not nearly as passionate about it as music, but I wrote poetry a lot in high school. I won a couple local awards for my poems. And
no big deal?
That's awesome. It wasn't really. I mean, I liked it, and it was fun, you know, to like express myself through these words. You know, I'm a big reader, but you know, I don't read what I probably am supposed to. But like all I read now is like biographical military operator books and stuff like that, autobiographies and stuff like that. But
feeding the brain either way.
Yeah, but I started writing this short story in 2011 in this little shack in the mountains, and it turned into a book. And then I spent like 2011, 2012 going into 2013 writing it, and then one day in like spring 2013, about the time I almost joined Fire, I was like, this is just the worst. And I deleted every form of it, that exists. I really hope it's not out there. I don't think it is. There might be like on my old computer some file deep down, you know, in one of the folders. Mark of the Beast is just,
Mark of the Beast.
Yeah, it's. I really hope it is. But I took the concept, and after my first, it was actually after my first Fire season, I was like, there's something to be. I took the first chapter basically of Mark of the Beast, and I was like, there's something to be said about this though, because I wanted to convey this story of Mother Nature. If Mother Nature was this actual living person that was also an entity, for, you know, as a not just a voice, but also an extension or an accentuation rather of the earth. And when I saw one of my first fires I was on, and I saw the various elements react. You know, you have the fire burning up the greenery, you know, the trees and the brush and stuff, and then you have the earth, and you have the water from the buckets or the engines, and then you have the metal from the tools, and then you have the human element, and you have all these elements kind of coming together in a strangely symbiotic way. Like there is a balancing act of it.
Yeah.
And it's and I was like, how do I put this into a single person, and what would they be like? And so I had this idea of kind of making this Mother Earth character as the main character of this story, rather than this guy. Like in Mark of the Beast, it's about this male, you know, who is this ex-military operator and does all these things, and that's how book one of my series is too. But he transfers that power to his wife, and she carries the trilogy, and so I wanted her to be the main character and kind of you know, be that living embodiment of a forest fire or a monsoon or whatever it is, you know, and what she would say if Earth was a person. If Earth could talk, what would she say now? And I think with climate change and everything going on right now, like, we need that voice, and people aren't listening to what the actual Earth is saying. So what if that was a person? And then make her, you know, angry and hired by the U.S. to be a military operator as like this pseudo witch person that can like do crazy things like manipulate the weather or organisms. She can copy DNA of you know, from mint leaf to bubonic plague into her body and put it out into the world. So I wanted to embody that, and so that's how I created my trilogy, and it was inspired by fire, and it was inspired by the things I was seeing, not just the fire itself, but just the other things I was seeing in nature on those assignments, because you see more than fire when you're spiked out in the woods all the time. You know, you see wild animals. I've been stalked by a mountain lion at night, spiked out. Like, there's all sorts of stuff that happens, and so I wrote this trilogy in between each season. I think in my off seasons, that's what I spent my time doing. I mean, I've spent easily 5,000 hours on this trilogy between 2013 and 2015 I wrote book 1. Between 2015 and 2017 I wrote book 2, and then between 2017 and 2019 I wrote book 3, and I actually finished book 3 in late 2018 is when I finished book 3. But I've done a little bit of manipulating of it in the last, because book 3 is pretty big. It's actually my biggest one.
Really?
So yeah.
Man, I meant to have you bring a copy of one of them. I
No worries. But yeah, book 1 is out and book 2 is out. It's called the Winds of the Immortals trilogy. Book 1 is Winds of the Immortals. Book 2 is called A Latticework Shrine. And they all 3 books take place in 3 different time periods: the 2030s, the 2050s, and the 2090s.
Oh, so futuristic moving forward.
Yeah, so that's been my big project, and music got put on the back burner that whole time. But I'm still into music. I'm playing guitar instead of bass now, and that's something I've been trying to focus more on in the off seasons as well.
Oh, that's awesome, man. And music, you know, to me is just such a big part of the Wildland scene. It seems like, I mean, like all the musicians we had just on the district this year, and whenever you're driving somewhere, you listen to music typically. Now podcasts, because podcasts have really come around in the last like 5-6 years, however long Joe Rogan's been out, really, you know. So props to him. And yeah, man. So I think it's just almost like a therapy sometimes with Wildland folks. Would you say that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Music especially. I mean, I go into my own world. But, you know, writing is also a lot like that. Like, when I write, like, I'm escaping into this fantasy, this world that I've created, and I kind of get to, like, live there. And, you know, you'll read the trilogy and be like, why would you want to be there? Because it's like a dystopian, you know, futuristic, post-apocalyptic story. But it is a way to escape and kind of be a part of something else and discover things about yourself through that artistry as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, like, I haven't read your books, but just from talking to you about it, it's just a good way to think about things moving forward, too. You know, like, I know everyone's, it seems like most people I know are, maybe it's just because we're Forest Service folks, but are, you know, thinking more green, you know, versus like when we were kids, and it felt like people were not as worried about it. You know, I know the gas crisis was a little bit before we were born, but, I mean, that was kind of the first step in any kind of movement that way, climate related. It felt like, you know, catalytic converters and all that good stuff were getting put on cars. And
yeah, the world I was raised in and what I was taught, it's not relevant anymore. I'm not even going to beat around the bush about it. I mean, the idea that, like, oh, go to college and get a good job and this and that, it's like, now it's like, you know, either be an investor or be in a trade school. I mean, there's only so many options for you now. I mean, if you're going to, because the prices of things and how they've gone up in the last 10, 20 years, and how little wages have actually gone up. I mean, I just got a job this last week, and they're like, you know, like, we're happy to have you, and you basically get to pick your schedule because we can't afford to lose you. You know,
Jeez.
Like, we're at this point where, like, it's and workers have leverage, and And that is something I touch on in the trilogy as well. On more of the political side of it is like, having this middle class or lower class, like having more leverage and kind of being able to, or at least attempting to manipulate these more markets that where billionaires, people that make unfathomable amount of money who don't even pay taxes, decide what we do. And it's very frustrating. I think a lot of Americans on either end of the spectrum, because as you know, like we're very divided right now, but there's people that are like frustrated and they're mad at our government, and they should be. And there's a lot of things that need to change. And even in our own culture, as you know, it's changing pretty quick because they have to. They're realizing like, people can't afford a house in the place they're working. And, if they've been in this industry for 10 plus years, they're not going to keep doing it if they can't even afford to live, They're not going to keep renting, if they've been in it that long. So
making it a lot harder to live where you want to live, especially like us living in Montana. Mm-hmm. It makes it a lot more difficult, especially coming up. The new firefighters that we had this year as really good folks, but they weren't really younger. Like, did you notice that this year? It seemed like a lot of, like Arthur, I think, was one of our younger folks, and he'd been fighting fire for a long time, and he's local, so it's not like he's really saddled with a mortgage at this point in his life, being a younger fella. But I mean, most of the young folks don't seem like they're going to the fire anymore, and that was a lot of the lifeblood for the seasonal fires. So
yeah,
it's gonna be interesting. Do you have that kind of in your book about stuff like that changing?
Yeah, a little bit. You're talking about the new book I'm writing. Or are you talking about the trilogy?
Well, I was kind of leading into that in the new book, but I was talking about the trilogy to see, like...
Well, and the trilogy is more of a perspective of these, it's a fantasy, sci-fi fantasy, and it's more in the perspective of these people on the world stage making these decisions. But yeah, you do get those perspectives of the common folk and stuff, and like even in by the time you're in book 3 and it's the year 2120 and, the world doesn't even look the same by that point. I won't get into detail, but it's crazy. And there's an old grave digger, this character who's like a 90-year-old grave digger, and he talks about what he's seen in his life and all the different phases and the different governments he's seen, and, how each one said that they were going to bring promise and wealth and all this, and it's just a different rhetoric, or it's the same rhetoric but to a different beat, and it's just one of those things where he conveys to one of the main characters, he's just this lowly, just poor gravedigger, but he's able to extend his philosophy to one of the main characters, who's this noble, because she's like, I don't know what to do, humans are just so greedy and stupid and selfish, and she's not a human. She's the next evolution of human. And he goes, well, is that what you think I am? Greedy, stupid, selfish? She's like, no. He's like, well, what if I were to judge, your race, the Homo aradia is what they're called. We're Homo sapiens. They're Homo aradia. It's like, what if I was to judge your species based off what you are, world destructors and this and that. So it's like, no, his whole philosophy was, you need to be what you are meant to be, and we're not all meant to be, you might not be a warrior, you might not be a poet, you might like fit some niche that is, it's just who you are. It's like, maybe you're good with horses. Maybe you're a driver. Maybe you love being an accountant.
Yeah,
maybe that numbers. Is your, maybe that, like, whatever it is that you do, be that, and be that to the extent. And it took me a while to do this, because I'm like, I'm a bassist, I'm a firefighter, I'm like, I'm this, I'm that. And I'm like, but what am I really? And I realized after a while, I'm a storyteller, like my grandfather, I was like, and I'm not the best at it by any means, and I barely consider myself a writer, but the point is, like, I want to live a life that allows me to convey other people's stories, not just mine. So that makes me have to be a good listener, and there's all these other things that flow into it. So I think a lot of the message that I like to convey with my writing and with the trilogy is through these different characters is like, what, maybe this queen isn't a good warrior, but she's a good diplomat. Maybe this person is a good teacher, but maybe not the best in the action of what they're doing.
So. Yeah. I mean, and kind of what I get out of that is just like finding your strengths and using your strengths in life, and not really making yourself into a mold or having someone else put you in the mold. And kind of the part I link into that is not that you were totally doing it, but kind of a little bit. It sounds like, just from my interpretation of like, the conversations we had, and I haven't known you that long, but the little bit I've known you is, you were going to be and I want to touch on this earlier, but it looped back around. You were going to be a legacy jumper because your grandfather was a jumper back in the day, and then so you would have been the second generation jumper, right?
Yeah, well, and it would have skipped a generation because, nobody in my family fought fire besides him. But yeah, really? he fought fire from, I want to say 49 to 55. And gotcha. He was, by the time he left, he was the lead of the training department at Missoula Smokejumpers. And when he left there, he actually, because my grandpa is infinitely more interesting than I am, so I got to touch on him for a second.
Yeah, absolutely. I was hoping you would.
Yeah, he.
Hey, and not to say anything from you, man. You're a cat. You got
no, man.
3 books already?
I don't know. Like he's just he's a tough one to top. So he did a jump for one of the presidents. I want to say it was Eisenhower. He jumped for Eisenhower, who was visiting Missoula. It was him and one other jumper. And the way he describes it, it was a very windy day, and it was like an exhibition kind of thing. And the other guy got blown halfway to Hamilton, as he puts it. Yeah. And he jumped for the president. He actually ended up kind of hurting himself on that jump, but he ended up talking to some of those politicians later on. Yeah. And was kind of like lightly talking smack on the Forest Service, some of their policies and how it needs to change. And Senator Lee Metcalf was listening to him at the time, and he's like, I like you, George. I like your attitude. What would you think about coming working with me in Washington, D.C.? We're writing up a little bill. It's to protect the forest and stuff. And so he got his whole he quit working for the Forest Service. He got his whole family. I think my mom was like 1 year old, maybe 2 years old at the time, and she had her older brother. And they moved to Washington, D.C., and my grandpa helped John F. Kennedy and Senator Lee Metcalf of Montana and an array of other folks write the Wilderness Act that ended up getting passed by Lyndon B. Johnson years later.
Yeah, no big deal. That
so
is awesome, man.
He's one of the people that is the reason we have wilderness, and wanted to especially protect the Bob. He was instrumental in getting the Bob Marshall Wilderness and the Great Bear Wilderness protected. So
man, one of the most beautiful places, in my opinion, on Earth. Yeah. Especially the Bob. I haven't been to the Great Bear, but the Bob is sacred to me.
Yeah, my first time in that wilderness was actually 2019 on an assignment, and I was like, I'm surprised it took me this long to get back here, but it was so epic.
Our summers are so busy. I think that's another thing that people don't understand when they see Wildland Firefighters. Like, we're in usually a pretty cool spot. Like, not so cool.
You don't get to pick it.
Yeah, we don't get to pick it. Yeah, not so cool when you're there.
Yeah.
And we don't actually get to go to the places we like to go. We're all outdoorsy, but most of the time you're so busy.
You're not exactly camping on your own terms.
Yeah. And what was your grandfather's name again?
George Ostrom.
George
Ostrom. He's somewhat locally famous in the Flathead. He was journalist and on the news there for 52 years, I believe. He just got off the air like 5 years ago.
Oh, really? I wonder if I've seen him then. Possibly,
I mean, well, not on TV, but he was on a local radio station giving the news. Yeah, every morning, like a lot of people recognize his voice, and he's very, very funny, very much a character, very much a public speaker, and that's where like I'm not on his level at all. But like,
I think you do good, man.
He's a very fascinating human. I mean, that's just touching the iceberg in what he did. He also followed around one of the last Indian cowboys who was a bull rider around the U.S. And told his story. He's an art collector. He has some amazing original art pieces from all over the U.S. of different Native American painters and various Western artists. He's been around the world. I mean, he served in Germany. He was there right after the war ended, actually.
Really?
He was on the boat on the Atlantic when Hitler shot himself, and he says it was because Hitler knew he was coming.
Yeah, I'd say the same thing.
Yeah, so, but his stories of that are pretty wild, you know. Yeah, he's just a fascinating person. So I always wanted to follow in his footsteps, and that was one of the main reasons I wanted to jump too. But,
yeah, absolutely.
But just being a wildland firefighter, I think now is enough for me. I don't necessarily need to
Yeah.
fill those exact shoes.
Totally,
but,
man. Well, and that's what I was kind of getting at about, like, you know, kind of almost putting yourself into a mold that maybe it's like not meant for you. Like you had mentioned before that, you know, maybe you're not supposed to go this way, but if, like college, you know, like back when we were growing up, college was where you went, you know, and now I think people are starting to think more like me and you, where it's like that's not the only option you have, you know.
Right, and also like jumping was so much different back then. Like, I was like, oh, I told him like some of the training stuff we had to do, you know, and what my mentor was telling me to do at the, you know, because you get your own mentor and all this, and he's like, oh, you know, we'd just go to Red's bar and see who needed to close their tab and like hire people. It's like, oh, you look at your tab and there's like over, you know, that's more money than I thought. I should probably get a real job. But like, you know, he was airborne. He was Army airborne. So transferring to that was a pretty no-brainer for him. He'd already done static line and stuff. So it made sense for him. But yeah, it was a totally different world. It was just a young man's job that they had back then, and kind of, you know, it's just something you did if you had your summers in between school. And now it's like a career building, very elite, like it's its own community, as you know. The jumper community is unlike any other in the fire world.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, a few of the older jumpers that were around, like the old base manager when I first showed up to Missoula was saying that too, you know, when he first started even, and that's, you know, pretty recent. And he was saying kind of same deal. It wasn't a career. It was more of a job that paid the bills and was pretty fun and maybe helped you get through school or whatever you were going in life. But usually no one was sticking around. Even the base manager, when he started, told you not to. He's like, you know, I guess it's always been kind of a program that could always go away. I don't know if that's so true now, but I think that's kind of the thought they had back then.
They got a good deal. They're not going to give it up easy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even if it makes sense to rappel a lot more. I mean, I still see a use for them. I think they'll always be around, at least for paracargo and certain regions. I think Alaska and R4 will always have them. But
I think so too.
Maybe the others, they'll eventually get phased out. But I don't know. They got their talons sunk in pretty deep into places, so they're probably going to keep it.
Yeah, starting to use different aircraft.
I mean,
and
I can't blame them. I mean, the year I was on Helitack, they beat us twice to fires, and I was like, man, we got up there quick. You know, you can get on a helicopter and get in the air pretty quick, and that shit moves fast. And still, those guys would beat us. Oh man. Well, you know, there's something to be said for that too. Yeah. And so I respect him. I respect the program. I think there's definitely room for growth with other programs that I hope that they wouldn't necessarily try to stifle just because they think it's gonna, you know, like for example, I'm trying to get on Missoula Helitack right now, and they've been trying to be a rappel base for a while now, and I think that would be a really good stroke for them.
I think so
both
too,
nationally and locally, mostly nationally. But you know, look who's next door. They're not going to want you cutting in on their action.
Yeah, totally. Makes it tough.
So I get it, but no, there's a reason for all these resources, and you know, people are always going to talk crap about certain things. I mean, there's people even like, oh, hot shots aren't worth a darn and all this. And it's like, you just haven't worked with the right crews, and you haven't seen what they're really capable of necessarily. And you know, there's a reason we're all out there, and there's awesome people from a contract engine in Oregon to a jumper out of Missoula to a rappeller to any of these people that I've worked with and learned from, and that's the way to look at it.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And I think, you know, just some advice to anybody who might be listening to this, hopefully some people listen to this in the wildland and outside and maybe just in your general life. That first impression, I know that it means a lot, but when you're on the wildland fire, you know, on the line or whatever you might be doing, in life, if you judge that person off your first impression, it might be a wrong impression. It might be the wrong judgment of that person because you never know. And I've had that a lot in wildland where someone's like day 13 or maybe in the middle of their tour. Like sometimes day 7 can be kind of rough because you're like, you're not over that hump in the double digits yet. You're halfway through and been a rough assignment, and you're just like, hey, how's it going, man? And they're just like shrug you off, and you're like, oh, I just got superstarred by, Lolo Hotshots or whoever, and you're like, F those guys, but like then, if you ever get a chance to time with them like off season or on a different fire, it's like, I'd at least, recommend giving another shot. Like either that person, don't let that person ruin the crew, or don't let that one experience ruin that person for you, because who knows what they're going through on that day, so.
Yeah, that always bothered me when people try to act so important or so cool on a fire, and like, because they're not. Like if you're acting like that, like you're just, you're boasting, you're letting your ego talk for you. It's like when I met you, like you were like super cool, like willing to help out like a first year firefighter with like something that was maybe really simple and like kind of dumb, but you're like, no, this is how you do it or whatever. But you're not gonna be mean a jerk about it or anything. And actually, a really good example, other like you as well, but like those jumpers I came out there with.
Yeah.
These guys, like one of those guys has been jumping for 19 plus years. Like this guy's done crazy stuff. Like he's division, he's all these things, and he's just
Scott Jones.
Yeah.
It was him.
Yeah, and it was just like the kind of like attitude him and a few of the other guys had when we were out there, and not trying to be too cool or anything. Like, if you've walked the walk like that, you're gonna be humble about it. You're gonna be pretty cool, and like some of the attitudes you get out there, from some people, it's just like this isn't conducive to the mission.
Yeah.
So what are you trying to accomplish?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes people just take stuff that's said just jokingly too serious. Like when I first got into jumping, this old retired smoke jumper's like, there's 2 people in this world, right? And he's a Reading guy, Region 5. And I was like, only 2? He's like, yep. He's like, there's smoke jumpers and people who want to be smoke jumpers. Remember that. And I was like this little rookie, and I was like, okay.
Yeah.
But it was hilarious. But if you heard that out of context, you might be like, oh, stuck up dickheads,
Yeah, exactly.
And I think it's important, like you guys coming out as the jumper mod to come help, like Scott Jones, like as salty as experience. I know salty means something to other people, but like just a salty guys, and like he's got a ton of experience and a ton of salt built up over the years of hard work, and just the nicest guy, and not like the saltiest in the other definition that people use all the time, as in like sour, but he's like as salty as experienced. And then Enrique was there.
Yeah.
And then
really good dude.
Yeah, really good dude. And did Hillary come out on that one?
She did.
Yeah, and Hillary, she's second year, third year.
Second year.
Yeah, I can't remember. Yeah, she was in her first couple seasons, I remember, and we're actually neighbors. She's awesome,
Nice.
and really quiet, and it's just having those folks come out and talk to the district folks, I think really helps kind of bridge that gap, because otherwise, like, there might be a little bit of the sibling rivalry going on, where you might get like, oh, these jumpers, because you never talk to them, you never get to know them.
So apparently back in the day, the rivalry thing was way worse. I've heard stories of old shot soups and stuff, like chewing each other out, like, you step on my damn cup trench, and all this stuff. I think the culture's changed a lot, and it needs to, like we don't need that kind of stuff out there. But there's a certain level of pride when you put in a piece of line, and you don't want people messing with it or something, and like. There's something to be said for that, but there's also something to be said for, I was driving back home with those guys one day, and I was like, yeah, I just feel like, I'm gonna be missing out on a lot, because since I washed, and he's like, man, we walk a thin razor line, and you might have dodged a bullet. And then not long after he said that, a few weeks later, I found out one of my RBs got he shattered his pelvis on his first jump ever. Oh, jeez, dude. And I hope he's doing a lot better now. I know it's still in the recovery progress, but it's one of those things. It's a high risk job, and it just takes a certain person, and like I said, you got to want it.
Yeah, it can be life changing, like you said, and that's just probably.
But it's a dangerous job in general.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, all of it, all wildland, all firefighting, not just wildland structure, all that.
You could be on an engine and see some crazy stuff, and
yeah, man.
we were on a fire actually in Arizona this year. I was with 2, it's me, which I have some fire experience, but it's my first year on an engine, and so there's new things to learn about with that resource. And I'm with 2 rookies. One's a second year, who's practically a first year with his experience. They didn't get a lot of experience last year, a lot of time on the line. And so I'm basically with 2 first years and my engine captain, and we're like running and gunning on this fast-moving fire through a subdivision in Arizona, and you're like, and I'm like, I haven't even done much like that on the hot shots because you're utilized differently, right?
Yeah.
So it was kind of like even the engine captain's like, all right, we gotta change tactics and do this, and now you got to be like ready to be like this. And one of the rookies is like, I don't think we really did good work back there. And it's like, well, that's sometimes the job, man. Like you go and you try something and maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but we were safe, and that was the important part, like. And it got Western, like literally Western. I'm standing on top of the engine on the radio while these 2 guys got the bladder bags going around this one house, and the captain's going to talk to this, person freaking out at their house. And I'm watching this lady ride her horse down the block to tell her grandma that the fire's coming. Things aren't, things aren't static out there.
Yeah.
We deal with a very fluid, very,
fluid,
fluid. Sorry, that's the right word. It's a changing environment. It's constantly changing, and you're gonna do tactics that sometimes, it's kind of like sometimes you'll be on the hill and you'll be like, this kind of seems futile, and by the time you realize that, maybe other people are, and you back off and you do something else, But having that voice too, and not being afraid, even if you're a rookie or new to this, and being like, what are we trying to accomplish? And as a leader, it's good to establish that leader's intent and be able to convey any changes to that leader's intent too.
Absolutely,
and
man.
I don't have a ton of experience with that, but just the experience of seeing it in action, I've noticed that is huge.
Yeah, and like you said, and because it's so fluid, and seeing like, all right, this mission is futile, like you were saying, and it's not working out for us, and your brain almost has to switch sometimes, where it's like, all right, we're not doing any good work here, and we're putting ourselves at risk, and then you kind of go into more of a like survival mode, where it's like, all right, me and my people and my engine, are our priority now. Like we need to back off, reassess, and then see where we can re-engage somewhere and make with safety at the forefront, which it always is. But like, when you're safe and when you're not safe. When even in a first year can be like, this feels weird. Like I don't really like this.
The hairs on your neck kind of stand up, and at least vocalizing that, and maybe somebody can reassure you, or they agree and you pull back. And on that note, when we were in Arizona, in that exact circumstance, this guy rolls up in the truck and does this. He's like, "Come off the truck," and I jump down there, and I'm listening to like the IC and like all this stuff happening, and I'm trying to hear him, but he's like, "Yeah, I got 10,000 pounds of low explosives and 20,000 pounds of high explosives on my property," and the fire's heading toward it. Oh. And he's like, the low explosives, he's like, I'm more worried about, and they're in the garage. The high explosives were outside in a bin. Like next to sagebrush, So it's like, so by the time I told the engine captain and the engine captain told the IC was already aware, which is good. But we pulled back away from that house, and luckily the fire hung up on some dirt and didn't jump into the brush right there. But I mean, we all pulled back away from that property because and that's not a huge surprise for that part of the world. Like you have people with all that kind of stuff. Well, it's like for mining.
I was going to say the mining area down there.
The different kind of stuff. I mean, I don't know. There's all sorts of kind of people. So who knows what they have it for? But
dude, and that assignment, I know exactly which one you're talking about because that's the one that we came down and replaced you guys on. And
oh yeah.
Wasn't there a 117-degree day and you had no air conditioning in the engine?
Yeah, so that fire had pretty much gone out, but they wanted us to look over it, just kind of be eyes on it with the IC4 there. They had transferred it to an IC4.
Oh, gotcha.
And we were kind of looking over that hillside, but we're sitting there, and we would move the engine a little bit, so so that the sun is to our backs, but it's a 117-degree day, and you're just sitting there,
man.
in the engine, no AC, and Yeah, so that's one thing about the job too, is dealing with the boredom sometimes, and like the lack of action is sometimes just as much or a greater struggle. So
when we switched out that one day, it was like 110, I think, and you guys had just drove down from camp.
We were lower in Phoenix, so I think it was even hotter in Phoenix.
I think it was. Yeah, you guys were just like drenched.
We went out that night, and it was like, we're having fun and having some drinks. It's like 11:30 at night, and I'm like, why won't it cool down? At least in Camp Verde, it kind of cooled down. Yeah. Like, it's not even cooling down.
Yeah,
it's
Phoenix is just that frying pan, man.
It's hot.
Those people are tough, man. Like, that's all I could think of. Like, geez, I can't. Like,
tough or something. I don't know. Maybe for, yeah. Well, and I knew a chef. I've done kitchen work a lot, and I knew a chef who was lived in Arizona, and he said, you do one thing outside a day, and he's like, you do it in the early morning or the late evening, and that's all you got the energy for.
Yeah, I bet. I could feel it, because just driving up to Camp Verde. Camp Verde, am I saying that right?
Yeah.
Camp Verde? Yeah. Just driving up to Camp Verde on that first day, we were just like, it was 110 probably in the valley, 105 or whatever, 115 in the valley, 105 on the road, and and that thing's limping up that pass and just melting into the seat, and you're like, I don't know how these guys did this for 14 days.
Yeah, I mean, we limped through it. Yeah. Figuratively and literally.
And literally, yeah, because that thing was stuck in limp mode, only going like 50 miles an hour.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Baking. Yeah, and for anyone who may be watching this, hopefully a few folks, the reason I keep checking my phone is because Parker put together a really good outline for this podcast. So I want to make sure I'm hitting.
Yeah, we covered pretty much. We've covered highlights. Quite a bit of stuff. I wanted to touch on some hazards, but we don't have to. We can skip a couple of them. I only want to hit on a few of them, mostly like hazardous mentalities.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good one, man. That's big.
Yeah, we can hit on that a little bit. So like, going back to, is it worth it? Or like, even better, you do a really awesome operation, right? Like maybe winds are favorable, weather's good in your favor. Things just kind of line up, and you got to ask yourself, like, were we good or were we lucky? It's one of the leaders I've had said it that way, and I think that's something to think about. Like, remember burning this spring? I remember looking at you at one point, and I was like, these burns have gone, like, I don't want to like jinx it, but relatively smooth, and they're like good mortality rate for what the prescription is. Not getting too smoked out as holders. There was a couple instances where they kind of did, but just really smooth burning operations between us and the shots, and I was like, is this one of those instances where we lucky or were we good? And in a lot of cases, it's probably a little of both. Like, okay, we implemented the tactics how they appropriately and various things, but like sometimes you got really favorable winds, and sometimes you got really unfavorable winds. It's like, okay, is this the time we pull the trigger on this burn? Is this when I gotta swallow my pride and say it's not time to do this? And different people have their different trigger points for things, and there's things that Jay would do on the hot shots that like maybe some other leaders aren't comfortable with, but that guy has a lot of experience, and his slides are different than other people's, and I never felt unsafe with Jay. We would do some things that like were a little bit more Western, a little off the cuff, a little bit more cowboy. Yeah. And it worked, and they were good, aggressive tactics. It's that firefighting order. It's fight fire aggressively, having provided for safety first, and we were about that. We'll do things if we can be safe about it. We're gonna do it aggressively, and
we'll get it done.
Yeah, exactly. But even then, he drew the right lines. We had an instance on Myers Fire. We left a fire near Libby to go IA it. I think it was reported at about 40 acres, lightning strike. And when we arrived, it was like hailing, and there was another lightning storm. This was near Phillipsburg.
Oh, jeez.
And we didn't initiate the first day, and then we didn't attack it. And but the next day we went up there, took this huge. We had to go up this super long road on ATVs and UTVs to get up there, and then when we did get up there, you're in this like jackstrawed lodgepole high mountain, just crappy terrain.
Oof.
And when the Soup and a few others were scouting it, he almost got hit with a snag that fell. And, that was kind of like, we're not going to go direct on this. We looked at indirect options. There weren't any great ones, but we worked with what we had and did some, borderline silly things, but it was safe. And it was safer than going direct and trying to prove something. Hey, we can put this 40-acre fire out.
Yeah.
Well, that fire grew to 87,000 acres that summer, and we were on 3 different rolls.
Jeez, man.
And it brought in people from all over the nation.
Yeah.
And, that's a lot of ground, and that's a lot of money, and that's a lot in general, but nobody died on that fire. And as far as I know, there weren't any major accidents. I could be wrong about that.
See, and like, yeah, exactly. And that's huge, man. Like, whatever the cost is, it's not the same as a life, right? Money can always be made. The timber is going to grow back.
Yeah.
The resources will be fine. But
some people's hunting grounds got burned up. There weren't any. All the cabins we did structure protection. They were fine. We prepped all those. And
that's a win, man. Even though it doesn't seem like it, especially the outside person looking. But everyone survived. Everyone went home and to their families. That's a big deal.
And on that note, like, if you're Californian, you might not have this philosophy. I understand, because it's a much scarier situation. But like, fire is part of nature. It is part of this community. It has existed for thousands of years, and literally the types of species that grow in these forests rely on it, and the ecology of it. So we need to stop seeing like fire as this enemy. But we are at a point now with climate change and everything that's happening that it is a monstrosity that we have to adapt again. And we're going to have to adapt again and again. And so, like, I was super anti-logging until just recently. And now I'm like, well, we have to now. There's going to be parts of the forest that it just makes sense. And you're helping, you're helping that industry. But, like, it's the goal is not to clear cut, but, like, we need to cut out some of these areas because it's just going to be nuked out. It's just going to be
It's going to be lost anyways. The timber's going to be gone anyways.
If we had the right tactics from the beginning and learned from the Native Americans, because Native Americans had people that were specifically trained to do burn operations for generations. This information would be passed down, and in the spring and the fall they'd burn everything because they know that the grass would grow back, the animals would come and eat the fresh mushrooms and the fresh all the flora that would come up.
All the nice regrowth.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we, as Westerners and as settlers, fought this thing for so long. Now we're between this rock and a hard place, and we have to continue adapting. And, maybe California has to have a different attack plan as the rest of the country.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is, like, if we're going to do this, we have to do it as a community, and we have to integrate, treating firefighters better and, incorporating the public. But, I say that with a grain of salt because, let's talk about like political smokes. Oh, well, we got this smoke way interior. It's an eyesore. Yeah. But we know that it's not going to do anything. But and I get it. If you're like somebody whose house has already got burned off of, you're sick of seeing this fire, and it's just there's still a puff up there, of course that person's opinion is going to weigh on you as a leader. You want them to sleep better at night.
Yeah, absolutely.
But putting people's lives in danger for something that has zero possibility of compromising suppression efforts is something I feel like we should get away from.
Yeah, and I think we do. But like you said, every big fire and every fire nowadays seems like has that pressure, outside pressure, political pressure, and I've been on fires, and I'm sure you have, where they'll launch the ship or something like that. It's like just to appease the public and maybe even the news that might be there to show that we're putting in a good effort. And it's like that risk, like the transfer of risk is what I was getting at,
And like we were talking about a few days ago, keeping aviation in the air just to keep your ship instead of, actually needing it. And like, do you really need to do a recon, or are you just trying to hold on to resources? And, and I get it. Like, there's things that happen above me that I'm not completely, like I don't completely understand. I'm not at that level, so I get why they do the things they do, but we have to put these people's lives ahead of the mission, ahead of these suppression missions, because it's only getting worse and it's only getting more intense, and it's easy to get tunnel vision and like fall into this role of like, we got to attack. It's like, maybe today we stand down. Maybe we take a day to like. It shouldn't take a fatality to do a stand down necessarily. Maybe there's just hey, we got this huge wind event. Like, look what just happened through the Southeast. One of the biggest for this time of year, broke records. There's never been a tornado event like that this time of year in the Southeast, and if we see these things happening, see these things develop, it's like, we got like multiple cold fronts coming in today, like winds up to 65 miles an hour. Like, maybe it's just an all-around stand-down day. Or maybe there's something we can do in the meantime that's safe. And I don't know, like I said, this is always this is all bigger than me and higher up than I'll probably ever be. Who knows? But like, it's stuff that like they need to realize, what people are doing on the ground with this stuff.
I think most people are, at least I would think, a lot of people are open ears to new strategy, tactics, and ideas that are safe, because fire is changing, like you said, like these years that we've had. I mean, when I started in fire in 2008, we had the fires of 2000, but really I can't think of a good banner year besides like the Yellowstone fire in 88, was it?
Yeah.
And then before that, 1910. I mean, I don't really think there's a big fire. There's probably a decent fire year between it that I don't know about because it wasn't live. But you had these big gaps in fire years, right? That were like these banner fire years, and now you don't have.
It's having closer and closer and closer. Yeah, it was like 88 is considered the year we let fire loose. And it's funny because I've met a lot of leaders in my fire career who started in 88. That was a very big year for a lot of people. And that generation is all retiring right now. If you line up the years, this is, we're at that mark where a lot of them are done now and leaving. And so we're losing a big, important generation of fire people who have seen it as its worst. And there's people in between that, of course, have with what's been going on. But every time you lose a pivotal generation like that, you can feel it. You can feel it through, like, kind of reverberate through the fire world. And I've talked to some jumpers that have felt that too, and in their community. And it's like you're losing something big, and you're losing a lot of wisdom with that.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Yeah. Shoot, man. I mean, it's been a heck of a podcast. You got anything else you want to?
Yeah, maybe we'll just touch on a little bit of my new book I'm writing.
That's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah, I think that's the last thing I really wanted to hit on. So
this will be book number 4.
Yeah, so the first 2 books of my trilogy are out. Book 3's 2024, 2025. I'm not in a hurry to get that one out at all.
It's already finished, pretty much.
But yeah, it's finished, and my views of nature and some of my experiences are vicariously lived through some of those characters. But the book I'm writing now is totally separate from the trilogy. It's not a future fantasy, post-apocalyptic novel. It's nothing like that. It's a fictional book about a wildland firefighting crew in the near future, but it's based on true stories I've had, maybe even a few I mentioned tonight. But it's I did it fiction because I wanted to talk about some stuff that is maybe a little bit of contentious subjects in this industry, and things that I felt like needed to be talked about. And there's not necessarily, there are going to be topics that are brought up that people are talking about now, whether it's climate change, higher pay, treating us better with benefits and all this, but it's not an anthem for that. It is just a summer on a hotshot crew, and what that is like, and how you can be wrung pretty dry, and just wrung out and kind of just left to your own devices afterward, and the crew splits up and all these things. So I just wanted to
kind of touch on mental health, a little bit of that.
Yeah, that's definitely in there as well, of course. But at the same time, I wanted to convey also, like, just the mystical power of fire, and how much I really respect fire itself. And people see it as this bad thing or this evil thing, and it's like, it is just as much of a vibe in this world as anything else. It is part of the process. It is, just as much as the rain is, as much as the trees, as much as humans, as much as anything else. We're all in this together. We're all here,
Part of the weather pattern almost these days,
And we need to respect each element and what it's capable of, and how we're going to adapt to that. So this new book is kind of about that. I would never try to put myself on the level of this writer, but I wanted to I wanted it to kind of be this generations of the things they carried. That story. By the author's name is eluding me right now. It's really bothering me. It was the #1 book when I was born in 1990. But it's a fictional story about Vietnam from somebody who had fought in Vietnam. To convey, he wanted to convey his story through a fictional standpoint, but based off what he had said, and I think it conveys the Vietnam experience very well. Let's see here. Yeah, Tim O'Brien. Sorry,
Tim O'Brien.
Tim O'Brien. The things they
Shout
carried. Great book. I wanted it to kind of be like that, but like of this new battle, this new kind of world we're living in, this climate change crisis, this climate crisis, and all these other things. So it's about a hotshot crew who actually gets split up into 3 pieces over the summer. The region takes control of them, throws at two extra people on each squad, and calls them a mod, and one of them gets put as part of a experimental fast rope program out of McCall.
Oh, cool.
And one of them gets sent to Alaska for like 2 months, and then the one that the character that's based on me is on just travels around the U.S., the continental U.S., and does the kind of things that I've already done, but it's just a little bit in the future. There's just a couple little different things like I've already mentioned, and the whole idea is just to kind of give the average person just a little bit of an insight into what it's like, some of the poisonous mentalities, some of the toxic leadership, but also some of the really good leadership and some of the really good things that people do for each other, and just the kind of family that you have from a fire crew is just unparalleled. I've never experienced anything like it.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And from what we talked about, because this was the same book you were talking about when we were helping Laura with the pack test, right? Where we were pack testing along with her.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember I was really liking the excerpt. Is that the right word that you were saying? You were kind of telling me about it. Like
I think I wrote a little blurb.
Yeah.
Summary or blurb, whatever.
Yeah. And I remember thinking, and it was actually bringing back to my experiences, which I really liked, because you want a book that kind of also like you can relate to others. It feels like, at least that's the books I enjoy. And as you were talking to me about the book, I remember being on the Great Northern and with my buddy Charlie Palermo, and the first time I ever saw an AeroPress, and I guess the first time I ever saw an AeroPress, the first time I ever like really got the appreciation and the bug for coffee, and kind of turned to a bit of a coffee snob after that. Yeah. And I remember like I was just going and grabbing my little Insta coffee in my cup, and I could just hear like the grinder going, and it's Eastern Montana, early morning. It's pretty cold. The sun's not up at all really, but just you can see the light of the day starting, but the sun's not up. And then I hear and then we fire the reactor up. The stove we have was the MSR reactor, and I mean like even just thinking about it and having you talk about it, I can put myself in that inversion of smoke that we're in. Everyone's eyes were kind of puffy, and just the smell of coffee first thing in the morning, and just like BSing with my buddy Palermo and another fella, Brian, who's on the other squad. He's just like chilling on the other side of the buggy, and he's just like talking a little trash. And I think he's a jumper now too, man. And so like a few of us from that crew became jumpers, which is super cool. But just like that experience comes like flashing in my brain when just hearing you talk about your book, man. And I think that's gonna be a huge part of your book, I believe.
Yeah, and I wanted to write about something I know. I wrote the trilogy about, like, I did a ton of research for it, and I constantly am reading about special forces from all over the globe and stuff to get that, like, military perspective, but I didn't serve myself, so I had to, like, talk to veterans and do all these things. But this is something I've done and experienced, and I'm not going to, like, pat myself in the back and say, like, I'm some badass firefighter. Like, I've met people in this job that are so sharp about whatever specialty they, whether they're a saw boss or burn boss or, higher up in a team that are just dialed, that would probably write this book better in a sense, but also I wanted to write it the way that I write. And I think that like people will like it because it's very just raw and it's real, and that's why I changed the names and the fire names and everything, because it's based off some true stories, but I wanted to do it fiction so that I could explain it the way I wanted to explain it. And and some people are going to be pissed off. Like there's absolutely going to be some divisiveness to this, and I'm okay with that, because it needs to be said. I have a Facebook page. Some people may have stumbled on it in the fire world. It's called Day 14 Vibes. That is me. That is solely me. And it's just a bunch of dumb fire memes. I mean, I have 3 pages. One's an artist, musical artist page. One's an author page, and one's that one. And of course, the other 2 don't have any followers, hardly at all. But the meme page has thousands. And at first it was just this fun. I'm just doing memes that people can laugh about, just kind of to boost morale on the fire line, just stuff we were all talking about and what would be funny, But one day I wrote a paragraph, so it wasn't a meme, it wasn't just instant gratification. Like, it was this paragraph that was like, and I won't read it or say it, paraphrasing a bit, but
people can find it, right?
Yeah, you could scroll down on Day 14 Vibes and you could see the comments too. So it's something like, if you haven't cut down 500-year-old trees while swimming through Whitethorn in California and, washing down convict catered food with hot Gatorade and high on no sleep and seeing faces in the column because you're hallucinating. Like, can you even say you've been a hot shot? And it was kind of meant to be like half serious, like, oh, that's kind of intense, half like funny. And this guy reached out to me on there and he said, I took this and blew it up and put it on a poster board for a fast team. And he was the deputy director of R5.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah.
That's a big
and
deal,
he's like,
man. That's awesome.
And he's like, keep doing what you're doing. Because like the stuff about mental health and, it's a hot topic, but like people need to realize like this is a very high stress job, and you don't have to see something traumatic. You don't have to see your buddy get hit by a snag or something to like deal with trauma. Like, you are expected to operate at a certain capacity at any given moment, and that builds this level of stress. And we have a suicide rate that is 30 times the national average. 6 years ago it was 10 times the national average. So jeez, we need to look out for each other. We need to take care of each other, and luckily I've worked with some awesome people and stayed close to some awesome people that have helped me, and I've helped them through some stuff. But take this season, for example. The season ended. I didn't get that last roll or 2 in that I wanted, to get out, which was nobody's fault, at least on the lower end. And I ended up kind of broke at the end of the season. And then one of my best friends committed suicide, and all this happened in a very short amount of time, and I'm just left to myself, and I'm not working. I'm sitting there. All these things come crashing down on you, and once again, it's like what we talked about when I watched out of Jumpers. It's like you find a new mission, and you focus on what matters, and you push through. And it hasn't been easy, but I've been lucky enough to have some really awesome firefighters in my life to help me out and line me out. I have a really great family and an awesome, supportive girlfriend. And so, I feel fortunate, but not everybody has that, and their situation is unique. And we gotta keep that stuff in mind and take care of each other.
Absolutely, man. I think that's an awesome way to end it. And the only thing I wanted to add to that is, like you having the voice for folks, and speaking to them through the book, like the way, like we were just talking when you were talking about your book, it spoke to me in my little way and brought me back to that experience that I had with a bunch of fellow Wildlanders. And then also like it reminded me of the Lorax, speak for the trees. And I feel like there's a lot of people, like talking for us these days, but back in the day, like, see, when I first started, there wasn't the social media and all that to relay kind of what a wildland firefighter goes through, and I feel like it's finally getting tossed around in more of the political circles, and you heard like I think it was a congresswoman from California talking about the gap in pay. So I mean, these are important issues, and I'm glad they're getting brought up, and that's why like your book and the Day 14 vibes and all that stuff is really important, and like you don't have to like all of it, man. I mean, even like this podcast, like I expect people might not like it and may not like all of it, but I'm also trying to be a voice in my own little way too, and hopefully this will grow some legs and start supporting itself, and maybe lead into some more charities. That would be one of the things I'd like to see happen the next couple of years is 5Ks and whatever I can do to give back to the community, because I keep talking about the Wildland Firefighter Foundation, how much they do, and I'd like to contribute as well.
But I've been thinking of the same thing, man, and trying to reach out, and I think like a lot of these things are good starting points, like this podcast, just you sitting down here with me in this empty U of M building right now is huge, and it means a lot to me, and I think it'll mean a lot to other folks too. And and like I always think of like, what can I do? And I'm like, well, maybe me writing this book is like my thing. And so the book is called The Digging Seed, for those of you who are interested, and I'll be advertising that on my social media, Parker J. Duncan, Facebook, Instagram, and that will probably be out, I'd like to say, within the next year or two. It's not a huge book. It's probably going to be more of a novella, smaller, but that's the contribution for now that I would like to do until I can do more.
Yeah, stepping stone, just baby steps with both of us and everybody in the community, and all come together and hopefully not pick each other apart, whether you like this podcast or like your book or whatever, and come together and help support each other. And like when you came to Steve, Doug bought your book right away when he found out you're an author, just like...
He was pumped.
Yeah, he was really pumped, man. And like that was so contagious, because he's like, let's, help each other out. Like we all go to Wildland Firefighter Foundation charities when we can, fundraisers, the breweries or wherever they might be. So yeah, it's a good deal, man. And hopefully people watch this, and hopefully people check out your book. And like you said, when your book comes out, The Digging Seed,
yes,
right? It'll be, you'll advertise it, and then I haven't released any episodes yet at this point, which I'm a little ashamed of, but fire season would not end this year.
It's all right. You're building up that repertoire.
Yeah, so hopefully today is December 19th, so hopefully 4 weeks from now this will be out, and Parker's going to put it out on his social media. I'll have social media for this. And please support if you can. And I want to thank everybody for watching. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Luke.
Yeah, thank you, man. Thanks for being here.